The panic we're seeing from Donald Trump right now. There's the growing investigations, not just Mueller, but also probing his campaign and business. There's the fallout from this decision to shut down the government. He said once it would be a Trump shutdown. And what's going to happen to his presidency when Democrats are in charge of the House next week? As we see the signs of panic, and I'm going to go through the evidence, there are also signs of contagion. The market's panicking as well. Now, you've probably seen this with your own eyes, the tremors that run through Wall Street, a rockiness that at times seems to mirror the jittery way that a caffeinated Donald Trump is charging ahead into his shutdown that nobody else wants, including his own party. Now, today, the Dow was plunging, but then rallying 260 points all over the place. A wild day. At one point, though, it was a 600-point deficit. Now, this is the latest in a month of wild swings. A lot of it came to a head when Donald Trump started sending very mixed signals about trade with China. Then he told Democrats he'd be proud to shut down the government, something he's lived up to thus far. But then in the last 2 weeks, the shutdown went to reality and things began to spiral. So it's worth taking a look at this because this really matters here as we round out 2018. You can see the Dow was already basically on a downswing this month, so it wasn't exactly in good shape. And they had an interest rate hike and a lot of the other things that affect the markets. But then, remember, it was just last Thursday when you had the chaos culminating with Donald Trump's defense secretary, Jim Mattis, announcing he was out.
Breaking news tonight, Defense Secretary James Mattis is stepping down, leaving a White House increasingly gripped by chaos and erratic upheaval.
One senior official saying tonight, quote, "The wheels are coming off."
Mattis's resignation came late in the day. The Dow had already fallen more than 400 points. And as the markets were dealing with that, the president decided to go ahead and go forward with what we have now, forcing the government shutdown and saying basically he wants to shut down our government for not paying for a wall that he promised we'd never pay for. And you had, of course, the fighting with Democrats, even though weeks ago, as I mentioned, he famously said the shutdown was on him.
It's really up to the Democrats, totally up to the Democrats as to whether or not we have a shutdown. I am proud to shut down the government for border security. I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it. The last time you shut it down, it didn't work. I will take the mantle of shutting down. It's up to the Democrats, so it's really the Democrat shutdown.
This is not just talk and spin. You can see here the whiplash driving the Dow down another 400 points on Friday. And then over the weekend, Trump Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin revealed that he was briefing and exchanging conversations with some of the biggest bankers in the country trying to calm the markets. That didn't work.
Mnuchin posted a statement saying the banks told him they have plenty of credit to lend to American businesses and households, but you now have several analysts making the point that his attempt at damage control could actually backfire and drive even more concern and unease in the markets.
And that proved to be true. On Monday, the stocks had their worst day of Christmas Eve trading ever. Although, again, you had the jitters, so the Dow was rebounding off those losses yesterday, gaining 1,000 points. That's the biggest point gain in history because it had gone down so much. And it could have stopped there, but this is why we're showing you the entire progression. It didn't because Donald Trump set things off again.
How long do you think the shutdown will last, Mr. President?
Whatever it takes. I mean, we're going to have a wall.
Whatever it takes, which includes major uncertainty, extreme up and downs for no apparent reason. You know, in the first 2 years of Donald Trump's presidency, the booming stock market has been one of the things he comes back to over and over that he wants credit for. But it is, as I think the chart shows, Donald Trump's governing that seems tied to an erratic market, an erratic mood, and the markets, they don't like it. We have a nation now that is looking at an erratic and voluble president and increasingly seeing at least a part of the economy, the part measured by stock markets, joining in the erraticism. And maybe Donald Trump's strongest argument is evaporating before his eyes. We have a big show tonight with a lot of guests. I begin on this topic with Elise Jordan, who worked in the George W. Bush administration and is an MSNBC political analyst and also host of the Words Matter podcast. That's a title I can get behind. And Clarence Page, columnist for the Chicago Tribune. Clarence, is this the moment that we're seeing, although there's a lot of Donald Trump's rhetoric and volubility priced into expectations, we're seeing some of this hurt him and hurt the markets?
Well, we've certainly seen Donald Trump get where he has gotten through rhetoric, through his ability to talk. And he has said all along that he can solve these problems of China trade and problems of health care and problems of Wall Street by being a great negotiator. We have yet to really see that happening. We see instead he claims credit for the stock market when it's up, and when it goes down, he blames the Democrats. When he has an inability to get his wall approved and funded by Americans, not Mexico, he again blames the Democrats. Just a week after, as you mentioned, saying that he'd proudly wear the mantle of a government shutdown. Of course, it's not an easy mantle to wear. And so he's really foundering to a large degree right now, and just doing a standoff against the Democrats, saying that it's up to them to reopen the government. But in the past, we have seen that situations like this, Republicans tend to get the blame, as they did back in the 90s with Newt Gingrich's shutdowns.
Elise, he's also bragged, as we mentioned, about when the markets are up. Take a look.
The stock market has gained trillions of dollars in value since my election and has reached record highs. The stock market is smashing one record after another. The stock market is hitting one all-time record after another, boosting your 401ks and retirement accounts. Everybody happy with your 401k? Because if you're not, there's something very wrong.
Can he do a call and response like that tonight?
Donald Trump has really been able to ride the wave of Obama's economy, and by projecting confidence, he has not hurt the economy. A little bit of bravado isn't necessarily a bad thing when it comes to economic recovery and strength. But as his voters start to actually be affected by the economic downturn caused by his trade wars, caused by his policies, that's harder to escape, and it becomes harder for those voters who might say, hey, we don't like his moral compass, we don't like the way he talks, but we like Donald Trump's economy. It becomes harder to forgive some of the other sins.
Yeah, and this goes to where the markets fit in as kind of pricing Donald Trump's competence. Paul Krugman, who's an economist with the New York Times, of course, writes, the truth is that most of the time presidential actions don't matter much for the economy. Short-term economic management is mainly up to the Fed. But when bad things happen, we do need the White House to step up. And he says it mattered a lot that both the officials in the outgoing Bush administration and incoming Obama administration responded competently to the 2008 financial crisis. Quote, unfortunately, there's no reason to expect a comparable degree of competence if something goes wrong again. It's
a rare occasion when I find myself agreeing with Paul Krugman, but I can't say that I'm more confident in Steve Mnuchin than I was Hank Paulson. Quite frankly, you see Steve Mnuchin off from Mexico doing this bizarre press release about credit liquidity that really only served to upset people more than it calmed anything. And so, no, I'm not confident that this is an administration that could handle an economic crisis, and I think that the market's pricing that into it.
Yeah, Clarence, Elise mentions liquidity. It's the kind of thing that it's like Fight Club. You're not supposed to talk about it that much. You're certainly not supposed to talk about whether the banks don't have enough money. That freaks people out. And so I wonder if, again, this is also, the buck stops in the Oval Office. Donald Trump picked certain bankers that he liked because he knew they were rich from New York, and they may have been good at banking. I'm not sure that they were good at doing what the government side is, which is being clear and measured when you try to address the markets.
Well, it didn't help matters much when the president talked very mean about the head of the Federal Reserve and hinted at firing him, which he can't do. But nevertheless, we do know that Wall Street, there's a lot of different reasons why the market goes up and down, but we know that Wall Street hates uncertainty. And we have a lot of uncertainty right now with a president who makes a lot of comments that he may only half believe, but that they sound good, so he says them. And the warning, or rather the comfort that Steve Mnuchin tried to give was kind of like the Surgeon General coming out and saying, we are fully prepared for a zombie apocalypse. Don't worry about it at all, folks. Well, what's going to happen? Everybody's going to have zombie apocalypse on their minds now. And you can have a panic without intending to. That certainly happens on Wall Street.
Yeah, and we're just seeing these jitters, and it's not to suggest by any means that what's happening in the markets is the whole economy, the real economy, et cetera, but it certainly seems like it has been supersized by completely avoidable, unnecessary actions and statements by Donald Trump and some of his aides. Now, Clarence, I have good news for you and perhaps for some of the viewers, which is the CNBC portion of The Beat is now over. I want you both to stay with me, and I'm going to add another guest as we get into some of the other wider issues tonight. The chaos roiling Trump world is happening, of course, against the backdrop of these investigations. And there's one ongoing mystery that's involved this cryptic case that is now potentially headed to the Supreme Court. It's reportedly, but not confirmed, but reportedly linked to Bob Mueller. Chief Justice John Roberts ruling an unnamed foreign company has until Monday to explain why it's resisting this grand jury subpoena. The case winding through the legal system. Meanwhile, Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani, using the holiday week, he didn't have to do this, Elise, but he chose to, getting back out there and saying, well, you know, when he once said Trump might agree to give more written answers to Mueller, well, that's over.
Do you expect that he's going to have to answer more questions in writing?
Well, I think I announced about 10 days ago over my dead body, and I'm not dead yet. So
that answers that. As a former
he's not answering any more questions from these people. Their outrageous activity. We did enough.
This comes one day after Giuliani was reiterating that the negotiations over a deeper interview, for example, in person, had not been, quote, formally closed. The loop hasn't been closed. I want to bring in now one of the nation's preeminent legal experts, Walter Dellender, represented the United States in the Supreme Court during the Clinton administration. He argued Clinton v. Paula Jones when the justice ruled that a sitting president can be forced to deal with civil court, which includes, of course, depositions and the like. He's also making the case in the Washington Post that a grand jury should be permitted, potentially, to consider indicting a sitting president. Great to have you here tonight, sir.
Thanks, Ari.
I know that as someone who's argued before the Supreme Court, which most people don't get to even see, most lawyers don't get to do, you're going to be quite careful about a sealed matter. But I wonder what your view is, given the few clues we have about this mysterious grand jury subpoena that John Roberts now has put a deadline on.
Well, I think it's relatively straightforward in the sense that there is a foreign corporation, a government-owned subsidiary, that is resisting turning over its records to the Mueller investigation, claiming that it's a foreign sovereign that has some immunity from U.S. legal processes. That is not likely to be a winning argument in a criminal case, especially in light of the fact that the Court of Appeals opinion was unanimous and it contained judges that are highly respected and run the spectrum of Republicans and Democrats on that court. You know, I think, though, what we may be seeing, Ari, is that this could be the year of the Supreme Court for the Mueller-Trump standoff. I think this could be by far the least important of the cases that the U.S. Supreme Court hears on an expedited basis. For example, what you just played with Rudy Giuliani resisting questions to the president. You know, other presidents, as we know with Bill Clinton, have testified before the grand jury by, video hookup from the White House. And I think it's a very weak claim if the special counsel wants to know what Donald Trump's state of mind is, if he's considering perhaps even just naming him as an unindicted co-conspirator, he needs to interview the president. And I think he could easily take an expedited case on a grand jury subpoena of the president for his testimony up to the Supreme Court. They could hear that case. They could also hear a case involving the House's decision, if it comes to that, to subpoena the Mueller report.
Would you expect Mueller? Would you expect him to pursue that before he closes up shop?
I think I would expect him to seek to subpoena the president. Because he wants to do a complete investigation, and he has said previously he needs to understand the president's state of mind when he engaged in a broad range of actions which might potentially be part of a criminal conspiracy. And I think he won't give up. I don't think it would necessarily unduly delay the investigation, because if you remember Bush versus Gore, briefing was done in a 48-hour period, and the oral argument 24 hours later, and the Supreme Court took several days to issue an opinion. You could have an expedited a case, especially, I think, since the president In light of the case, I argued and lost, Clinton against Jones. Bill Clinton was required to sit for a day-long deposition in a civil case, and the U.S. versus Nixon, where Nixon was required to turn over the tape recordings that he had made of private conversations in the Oval Office. The law is entitled to every man's evidence, and I think they're blustering when Rudy Giuliani acts as if it is his decision rather than that of the Supreme Court. And I don't think the Supreme Court will necessarily...
You say every man's evidence. You know, I object to the terminology. I would say every man or thug.
Right, right. Well, you know, look, I think the Supreme Court is not necessarily going to break down on any kind of ideological or party lines
with the
in
courts,
deciding
their
these
institutional
cases.
credibility at stake. While
That's
I have you as a
absolutely.
legal eagle, and then I'll go briefly lightning round to everyone else, I got to get you on the other thing that's happening, which is there's a ton of cases. The Trump administration shut down the government. Now, in a bout of extreme legal chutzpah, they're citing the shutdown to say they should have more time or a delay in the Trump Hotels foreign bribery case. Is that a good argument for the government to make?
I don't think so. It could be that they're covering themselves, against having lawyers work without pay, which could be in violation of something called the Anti-Deficiency Act, by making sure that a court rejects that argument, says, no, you got to make your filings when we tell you to make the filings.
Got to get in no matter what. Elise Jordan, Anti-Deficiency Act.
Anti-Deficiency Act? You would be deficient asking me about it on your show, Ari. I trust your legal acumen more than that.
Clarence, final word.
Yeah. Well, I don't know more about the Anti-Deficiency Acts either, but we are on. Every time somebody brings up the question of can a president be prosecuted, everybody says, well, no, it's not settled in the courts. Maybe now is the time to settle it. Maybe now is the time to push it. There's that same argument has been given for pushing for impeachment. And I'm not a radical, frankly. I like to do these things in a gradual and thoughtful manner. But we're really in uncertain ground here, and we're finding more and more apparent possible violations by the president. We may be forced to do this.
We don't look at these segments as an intellectual knowledge competition, but if they were, it's clear everyone agrees Walter wins. With deep and extensive knowledge and some interesting thoughts from each of you. So my special thanks to Elise, Clarence, and Walter. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.